Hello everyone, welcome to my first book review. My name is Sarah and today we will be discussing Lore by Alexandra Bracken, which is a standalone YA fantasy novel that came out early this month. Before we go into this, I would just want to warn you there will be spoilers in the later parts of this video, so I will warn you when the time comes. So a little bit of a rough summary. The story is a modern day reimagining of Greek mythology set in present day New York, and we follow our main character Lore as she got caught up in the fight among the gods in the Greek pantheon and the humans descended from the heroes in the Greek mythos. She teamed up with her long lost friends and made ally with a god in order to take revenge on the god that is responsible in the brutal massacre of her family. As she went into the journey, she met the surviving gods one by one, reigniting old flame, rebuilding friendships, accepting truth about herself, and learning to forgive. I would describe this book as the Hunger Games meets Dan Brown's Professor Langdon's Adventure with a YA perspective set in Greek mythology universe, and I must say, this is a combination I never knew that I needed in my life. The way everything is mixed for me is very unique and gives a really fresh twist to the YA genre and some added complexity. When I say this is like the Hunger Games, it is because of the catalyst event in this book, which is called the Aegon, which happens once every 7 years as a form of punishment from Zeus for the other gods' betrayal. They stay here, Lord of Sky, and stood right against the fall of twilight and spoke, "Hear me, blooded heirs of those proud men who ventured into the darkness to slay those monsters and kings past. I call you to a final Aegon to win your own lasting glory. 9 gods have betrayed me and now demand cruel revenge. For 7 days at the turn of 7 years will they walk as mortals, so you men. And all your heirs henceforth may break your own fated path and turn your thread of life to immortal gold. Reveal your strength and skills, and I will reward you with the mantle and the deathless power of the god whose blood stains your bold blade. For this chance I ask much. Gather at the navel of the known worlds and begin your hunt when the day is born. So it shall be until the final day when one remains who is remade whole." So for 7 days, the gods will descend on earth as mortals, and they have to survive to kill or be killed by other gods or hunters who are descendants of Heracles, Odysseus, Perseus, and other Greek heroes. If you're a fan of Greek mythology and maybe even love Percy Jackson series, then this is for you. Even if you aren't, I still highly recommend you to read it anyway. Now, the interesting concept about the Aegon is if a god is killed by a hunter, then the hunter will inherit his powers, become immortal. The downside is that they have to go through the next Aegon and be hunted themselves, and this will go on and on until the end of time. For example, Aphrodite was killed in the previous Aegon, and her powers are now inherited by a patriarch of House of Odysseus and was renamed Heartkeeper. And yes, the gods' power are gender fluid, so it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you can take on the powers of the god that you kill. This event of Aegon makes the story more action-packed and suspenseful, as our heroes are chased and ambushed unexpectedly in several parts of the story, and we get their resourcefulness as they plan their way in saving the world while trying to figure out the master plan of the villain. The story starts in the middle of the action, where some of the bloodlines have extinct and some of the old gods have been replaced with a new one, and each have their own new names. It is written in third-person limited POV, and we are put in the perspective of Melora, or Lore, from House of Perseus and last of her bloodline. This is a standalone novel, at which I find a relief among the myriad of YA fantasy series, because I really don't have the patience to wait for the next installment. The story itself has room for maybe not a sequel, but maybe a prequel, since the Aegon itself has been gone for quite some time, and it is nice to probably get like a perspective of the other new gods and how they won. And how they won the Aegon itself. I think that could be something that the writer might want to explore. Just an idea. But as itself, the story stood well. It probably doesn't even need any sequel or prequel. It doesn't need any further explanation to what it is. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Greek mythology, then maybe a short Google search might help. Sure, the Greek mythology is wide and the Greek pantheon consists of so many gods, but this is only concerning with the main gods. The writer doesn't feel the need to explain a lot about the basics because she assumes that most of us already know about the basic storyline and some of the popular tales in the Greek pantheon, which for me, I personally don't mind. I think if she's trying so hard to explain everything, all of the basics, then it will take so much time. The book will probably be like super thick. It might even get boring. And I'm actually thankful that she decides to trust her readers in understanding where she's trying to take us and the information that she's trying to deliver. But if you do want some context, then I suggest you go to Overly Sarcastic Production. Their videos are generally short, so you can get a little bit of information on how the relationship between the gods and maybe some of the tales that they are referring to, so that you might, damn it, so you might have some, so you might get some idea on how everything really works, on how the relationship works. However, I'm gonna be honest, I was having a little bit of problem following some of them, as a bunch of them were introduced as a part of world building, like almost all at once, almost at the beginning of the first 100 pages. I was like, who's Philip? Who's the Rivero? And like, oh, he's the oh yeah. I mean, it took me a little bit some time to keep track on who's there, because they did a lot of name dropping there. My knowledge of the Greek mythology came from Percy Jackson, Hercules, the movie, Disney's Hercules, and also I was gonna say Sam Worthington? Yes, Sam Worthington. That with the movie with Sam Worthington. I had to highlight a bunch of stuff in order to keep up with the names and all the events and the Greek references. There are frequent flashbacks that is relevant to each point of the story, and for some people it might hamper the flow, but not for me. In most cases, the flashbacks are usually boring, but you read it to find some important details. Luckily, it is not the case with this book, because I find the flashbacks not only very insightful, but also quite interesting. Usually, in most cases, the flashbacks are usually the boring parts, and I'm glad that it's not the case with this book. Lore is actually my third book this year, and before this, I've read a book that alternates between the past and present, and the flashback is the more interesting than the present day timeline. So I find it really interesting that in Lore they managed to find balance in both the flashback and the real story. These flashbacks really helps gives Lore's character some emotional background, and we can understand her reaction more towards certain events, making us feel more attached to her, and feel the way she did towards certain people, and whether it's the people from her past or the people from her present. Laura's character is very rounded, she's flawed, and if you have problems with Mary Sue's like me, don't worry, she's definitely not a Mary Sue. She's a very aggressive person, but not to the point where she becomes a brute. Mostly her actions are in response to what other people have done. And speaking of which, there are blood and gore in this book, which for me, I think it's a plus. I kind of like it. She's trained to be a hunter. We get to see her younger self as she really immersed in the fairy tale, and she wants to be like the warriors in those fairy tales, like little girls wanting to be princesses. You read that and you can feel the stark contrast between her present day self and her younger self, and how she have lost all this idealistic innocence because of her family tragedy. Her inner conflicts lies between her moral struggle and her quest for personal vengeance, where either it's vendetta or maintaining her humanity in this God-eat-God world. For this, enter her love interest, Castor, from House of Achilles. He was presumed dead for several years. He was a sickly child until they were separated because of his quote-unquote death, and he turned out to be the new Apollo. Castor acts as Lore's voice of reason, her anchor to humanity as she progressively went down the rabbit hole. Their relationship for me is actually very well written. Sometimes I find that when they're trying too hard to write like this quippy dialogue to show like, oh, these two are very fun together, they're very like sarcastic to each other. I find it almost trying too hard. So it's kind of nice to see them just being human. They're just being nice to each other, but at the same time they have this meaningful conversation. And Lore, there's a reason why they both are so good together. It's because of the contrast that they have. They start off as childhood friends. Both were outcasts and they trained in the agoge. Castor was Castor was shunned for being sick, and she came from a family that have fallen out of favor with the other houses. Personally, I love relating myself to underdogs. We always root for them, but at the same time, I feel like it has been so overused by other authors as well. Even in the previous YA book before this, even the Cruel Prince also starts with underdogs. That was great. Fuck. Oh my. There. So you can see why I feel like this. There's just too much of them. Even a lot of YA books that were recommended to me also contains a lot of underdog story, which is fine in a way, which is actually quite good. It shows that you can rise up to be the best of them all. Everybody has the opportunity to become the best that they can, but at the same time, I've seen this so many times that it's I just want to see something different. But still, I don't mind it in the story. I thought it really fits very well. Their relationship at the beginning, chronologically, is very tragic, with Lore's family tragedy and Castor's illness, and being at such a young age, experiencing those. It must have been very traumatic. I feel for the both of them. I love the contrast between the two, how Lore is very passionate and kind of angry, while Castor is always so calm and collected. The romance is quite minimal, but I think that's the beauty of the story. It's not trying too much. If it is too much, it will be too cringy, too cheesy. It might take away some of the sense of urgency, and if it's too lacking, it would feel too bland, and some people might think that it's too minimal to the point where it doesn't really matter. But I like it because it adds more flavor and a variety and a little bit of escapism in a world where you know you might die anytime. So it makes me smile, and that's all that matters. For Castor, when he becomes Lore's voice of reason, at first I kind of find it annoying because he keeps reminding her to, like, remember yourself, not to lose sight of what matters, always choose to be a good person. Because I personally like it, if my characters have a little bit of moral gray area. I mean, it's not as if like she's out there killing people left and right for no reason. She has a purpose, and the person that she's trying to destroy is actually really bad. It's really evil. But this is YA book in the end. We're not reading Game of Thrones. So ultimately it becomes a lesson about how revenge will lead you to a path of self-destruction. Which is right. Revenge stories are usually my favorite, but even I am aware that realistically vengeance never leads to anything good. It always leads to a lot of negative consequences. But is this book that black and white in its display of morals? No, not really. At the beginning of the book, Lore has to team up with Athena, which really excites me since she is like my favorite in the Pantheon. Alexandra Bracken really managed to capture the personality of the gods through their dialogues and their physicality. For instance, with Artemis, the woman, the being, looked as if she'd been carved from the darkness of a deep ancient wild. The goddess's blonde hair was matted with leaves and caught in pale, almost snow-white clouds around her dirt-streaked face, even dulled by mortal blood. There was a pearlescent quality to her ivory skin as if she radiated moonlight. It was Artemis. The goddess bared her teeth, but Lore's gaze fixed on the way her fingers were curled into claws around her compound bow, stolen from a dead hunter most likely. It wasn't dirt on the goddess's face, but dried blood. it had doused her front, speckling the sky blue fabric of her robes. Lore's gaze fixed on the quiver strapped to the goddess's back, the one held in place with a strap, not of worn leather, but of braided human hair, all different colors and textures, all sticky with blood and flecks of scalp. This description really captured the physicality of Artemis being goddess of the hunt and giving him this really primal, almost animalistic look without discounting her godlike features. With Athena, since she played a major role in the story, the writer managed to expand and discuss her deeds and their effects throughout the millennia. It says here, "I transformed Medusa," Athena continued, so that she would have protection against all those who would try to harm her. "That's bullshit. You didn't give her a choice, didn't you?" Lore bit back. "And now history remembers her as a villain who deserved to die." "No, that is what men have portrayed her as. Through art, through tales," Athena said. "They imagined her hideous because they feared to meet the true gaze of a woman, to witness the powerful storm that lives inside, waiting. She was not defeated by my uncle's assault. She was merely reborn as a being who could gaze back at the world unafraid. Is that not what your own line did for centuries? Staring out from behind her mask?" On a side note, this actually reminds me of a movie on Netflix called Bulbul. Highly recommended. The story is actually quite similar to Athena's perspective of Medusa. I'm not even gonna bother with spoiler alert because this movie is not even trying to be plot twisty. It's mostly told in flashbacks about a lady of the house, Bulbul, and her story on how she became a Chudel, which is sort of a female vampire in Hindu folklore. She had gone through some pretty R-rated stuff, so be warned if you're gonna watch this. There's the allusion to the goddess Kali, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Kali that was shown in the movie. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where because of her, Bulbul was reborn as a powerful being. You can really see the parallels of the story with Medusa. There also talks about feminism, which makes me a little 50-50 about it, but it ties in nicely with Athena's story. "I knew he was right. I had no one else. I had no family. It was the moment I realized my future was entirely in his hands. There will always be a man deciding my fate, whether it was my father, an archon, or a husband." The reason for House of Perseus fallen out of favor is because a woman claimed the power of Poseidon. It was centuries before they allowed women to hunt at all, and now only a select few are chosen to work in a sort of pack on behalf of the Archon. Tidebringer, whether intentionally or by accident, claimed godhood herself 14 cycles ago, and not from just any god, but one of the originals, Poseidon. It was strange to feel both deeply ingrained revulsion and sympathy for the new god. Lore had been thought to hate her, to blame her for what became of the House of Perseus. Over and over, she'd been told Tidebringer was wrong, as if the unnatural thing wasn't that a mortal had killed a god and taken his place, but that a woman had dared to try. So yeah, if you can't tell, that's actually an allusion to how sexist everything is in the pantheon and in this tradition that they have. There's sexual assault and allusion to it, gore, as I mentioned, pedophilia, or more likely allusion to pedophilia. So trigger warning, that's actually made my skin crawl. The pedophilia is in one of the family where being not only sexist, but also a very traditionalist on how people in the past treat women and children. It is really apparent in this scene. "I will wait until she is 12, as ancient custom permits, to wed her, and wait until her first blood to bed her." Aristos Cadmo said, not looking at Lore, "She will be fostered with me until then to ensure she is brought up correctly. There is but one thing I want. It's lucky that I enjoy fire in my woman." He leaned in closer, and the challenge of extinguishing it. Yeah, so that was said by a man that is possibly half a decade old to a child. Yeah, that doesn't make my skin crawl at all. To be honest, I was a bit turned off, especially at the later parts of the book. When it comes to the feminist agenda, I rolled my eyes and be like, oh, not this again. I just don't like the term anymore, especially when Wrath as a villain is very one-dimensional and even cartoonish. Wrath is the new Ares. The depiction of Ares so far has always been the same, whether it is in God of War or Wonder Woman. They've always been cartoonishly evil, but lucky for you, Wrath is not the only villain in here. So at this point, I'll be talking about huge spoiler stuff, so go read the book and maybe come back to this video if you want to know more. If you decided to stay, then you've been warned. So if you want to skip to the ending, then skip to this timestamp. The wolf in sheepskin is Athena. I know, I was kind of angry in the beginning because how dare the writer, how dare she vilify my bias in keeping up with the pantheons, but I made peace with it. I'm okay. Don't worry, Athena has an arc. For me, it was a very well done plot twist, since Athena's line has some sort of a double meaning to it. At first I thought that she was being, like she was just being a god, being the way she is. But she was actually trying to isolate Lore from the group, alienating her from the others, especially Castor, since Castor has a hold of her emotionally and mentally. She was being manipulative, and I was able to sense that, but I guess I'm one of those people that has been brainwashed by the singular representation of her. I just thought that, she's a goddess, and human attachment is just not part of her resume. But the lesson learned here is that they need to learn the value of humanity and humility in order to be released from their shackles of power in order to gain ascension and just stop with the Aegon once and for all. Thankfully, Athena's arc came into full circle, and I'm gonna be honest, it actually did make me cry a bit. This has also touched the issue on sometimes a woman's biggest enemy is other women. In this case, it's Athena versus Lore. In spite of their conversation about gaining power in the face of adversity, the betrayal really hurts Athena. It really does. She is, after all, the goddess of war strategies, so she is definitely using up her best asset in getting her personal objective. And her character came in full circle when she fully realized what does it mean to be the protector of the cities and the value of self-sacrifice. There's one more thing that almost turns me off, that actually, well, not almost, it actually did turns me off, is Castor's personal objective. In the beginning, he didn't know how he got Apollo's powers because remember, he has an illness and it became one of the mystery they're trying to solve. Like, how can this really sick boy kill a god, Apollo of all people? He himself wanted to solve that mystery, but then once everything was revealed, he simply said that, I wish I could tell you that I was brave and strong and that I deserve this power, but I can't. And even though I know I might have to let that go, the thought kills me. I would do anything to prove myself to you. You have nothing to prove to me, Lore said. Why would you think that? Castor turned to look at her, a faint smile on his face, but his eyes blazed with power and with that same wild, irrepressible feeling she was drowning with. Isn't it obvious? He asked quietly. I wanted to be worthy of you. So yeah, that really kind of takes it away for a bit. It was small, but it almost made me angry. Castor is a nice guy, too nice for his own good. He has been selfless since the beginning, even when he was very sick. I just wish that he has one single desire for himself, and that something that is not related to the female lead. Not because he was trying to impress the girl. That tiny bit of selfishness would have made the story perfect for me. Overall, Lore is a very enjoyable read, especially if you're into Greek mythology. I gave this book 5 stars on Goodreads for the twists and turns and the emotional roller coaster that it took me. That is all for my review of Lore. Let me know what you think in the comment section. You may follow me on Goodreads. I'll leave the link in the description for my account. Also, please like and subscribe for more reviews. It'll really help the channel now. Next, I'll be doing an adaptation review of Aravind Adiga's The White Tiger, since the movie will be on Netflix soon. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye!